Tim Bayle has 5 kids, 21 grandkids, but that does not make him qualified to write about fatherhood. His failures do, and that's why Tim is here today, as backwards as it may sound, to talk about how the lessons learned in failure can help make better dads. Tim, thanks for being on Harvest. Fatherhood, a vocation under siege in our society. How important are dads today?
Well, dads are, you can maybe guess their importance by looking at how many people have father hunger. And it's everywhere. The yearning that men and women have to have a father who loves them, doesn't berate them and intimidate them, but it cares for them. So fathers are important. We know that because God is the Father Almighty. Jesus told us to pray, our Father who is in heaven.
Well, you talk about the need for a father. How much can people turn to that biblical father and fulfill that father hunger?
Well, we have to look at God first, and we have to learn what his perfect fatherhood is, because we can't be perfect because of the fall. And so when we learn about his fatherhood, and we learn specifically in Psalm 103, it says, like as a father pities his children, so the Lord pities them that fear him, for he knows our frame, that we are made of dust. And so as we learn from him his fatherhood, it gives us the courage to be a father and to fail in our fatherhood, but to take the next step and to trust him, to use our fatherhood for the blessing of our community, and especially our children and our wife.
Well, you know, that leads into my question, you know, how vulnerable were you when writing this book? Because you're talking about failures, and we all want to do over. You know, sometimes we look back and we're like, oh, I wish I could have done that differently. How vulnerable did it take?
I don't think pastors and fathers should be a doll. I think it destroys our ability to lead for people to think that we're somehow made differently than they are. And so whether it's in preaching or counseling, or whether it's in the home, we have to be honest about our mistakes. One of the things I hear from college students all the time is that their dad never apologized to them. And I think that that's the most godless thing that you can do as a father. And so, yes, the book is vulnerable. It's not just vulnerable about me, it's vulnerable about my dad, who I adore, I love. He's been dead 35 years. But people aren't going to believe that they can live in a way that pleases God if they're surrounded by people that use hairspray. Men, not women.
Well, and you say this, you've been a pastor yourself. You were the son of a very noted pastor and author.
Right.
What kind of A, pressure, and B, example did you get from your dad?
Well, I didn't get the pressure that I think makes pastors' kids bitter, which is, you better not ruin my work.
Right.
I never, ever had that from him. That was such a very sweet thing. But I did get pressure in the form of mockery. I remember sitting at the table a number of times, and I was the worst kid in the family in terms of school, you know? And he turned to me in front of the family. He said, well, Tim here is going to be a garbage collector when he grows up. You know, and that was actually his love. And it wasn't said in a mean way. It was just his way of saying to me, there are consequences for what you're not doing at school, you know? And so, but there was also the pressure, if you call it that, of him quoting specific scriptures to me that match my personality. Like, for instance, he would say to me regularly, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. I have trouble making decisions. And so he'd quote that, or he'd say, Tim, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So if you ask me about pressure from my dad, the pressures were godly, biblical pressures. He didn't mind me failing, but he was going to make it clear to me what God's standards were, and they were going to prevail in our home. With great tenderness and love, he kissed me all the time. But yeah, there were pressures, but they were good.
And so when you have those pressures and, you know, you put pressure on your kids, it produces something, but it takes guts to do that. So for the dads who may be watching, or their wives who are going to tell them about this show, what message do you have? What's the takeaway in Daddy Tried?
Well, one of the things that frustrated me in looking at what was available in terms of reading literature, books, was that I didn't find anything that dealt with the constant in my marriage, which was that often my wife did not trust me in the discipline of our children. I think that's one of the most difficult things that wives have, mothers have, to trust their husbands. And the truth is, husbands and fathers and mothers discipline their children in different ways. And there are times where a father sees and he acts. And mothers generally don't like that because they're afraid that it's going to violate the relationship and poison the relationship. So there were a number of times in our raising of our children where I would see something and decide it was time to be addressed. And it never suited my wife in when it was addressed, and a lot of times she didn't even see the problem. You know, if she agreed on the problem, she rarely agreed that now was the time to address it, right? And I think dads have to be willing to trust God in those times. What I have seen since then is that my wife has said, as our children have left the home, that the thing she's most appreciative about me is the fact that I wouldn't give in to her on those things. Because now she sees the fruit of our family and she compares it to other fruit of other families. And so I would say to dads, in this book I talk about the importance of fathers fearing God instead of their wives. And I think that's just so important.
So it's not the same thing?
Well, no. I mean, you know, here's an interesting concept. Men and women are different. You know, they're different. And Chesterton says that the question isn't whether or not it's going to be a quarrel. It will be, because they're incompatible forces, man and woman. He says the question is, can you keep it a lover's quarrel?
Well, and how do people do that? Because one of the reasons fathers aren't around is because men and women don't get along. Their quarrels don't stay lovers' quarrels. Divorce happens and the dad's gone.
So what's the question? I'm not sure.
The question is, how do men and women, husbands and wives, work through those disputes and how to discipline children and discipline with love?
Well, first of all, don't let your wife be the judge of what your love is as a man. I mean, it's so important. Second, the whole point of Daddy Tried is to lower the entry level for the adventurer who is a father, okay? I want people to understand that if you've grown up in a broken home or without a dad present, and you have a fight with your wife after you get married, it's not the end of the world. Normal, good marriages fight. I want dads to understand that you will have tension, you will have conflict, you will have arguments, you will fail in the discipline of your children. I tell a story about my failure with one of my daughters, and we still tell the story in our family, and it's pretty bad failure. But you keep walking because you trust God that in our weakness He is strong. We have to see that failure is good, that it's because we're sinners, and that God promises that in our weakness He is strong. I want to encourage fathers to fail. Not that failure is good, but that if you avoid failure and avoid risk, you will never be a good father or husband.
You're going to hear that story tomorrow, because Tim's going to be back with us to talk more about this as we go into our Father's Day celebration on the Friday show. The book is called Daddy Tried, and to connect with him, all you have to do is go to his website, daddytriedbook.com. If that's too complicated for you, go to our website, harvest-tv.com. We'll have a link to it. Still to come, Stefan joins us from Malawi with how Feed the Hungry is helping people affected by the recent drought. But up next, Pastor Mark Lance concludes his teaching with his series, The Leash. We're right back with more Harvest after this.